One from Invincible. I love the show so much. I watched it 3 times already. Probably
Oh
will
yeah.
watch it again all the way through once season 2 comes out. But yeah,
Yep.
Amazon did a amazing job with this. And I know that you've said that you're okay with just this being the only season, like you'd be satisfied, but I need 13 to 15 more seasons of this now. Like,
I'll take them. I'll take as many seasons they give me. But this show, I'm satisfied at the end here. It was so good and so well realized.
yeah.
And this scene here was the one that just solidified that I already knew I was going to love this show because the show starts out, episode one ends with basically Superman killing the Justice League. It's obviously not the Justice League and Superman, but every character in the show is stand ins for archetypes from the DC universe.
Hmm.
So you see Omni Man just murder the defenders of the globe or guardians of the globe. And you just sit there and you're wondering, okay, what's going on? Was he possessed? Were they corrupt and he knew? Like, what's the deal here? And there's 1,000 ways they could have messed it up. But the simplest explanation was that Omni Man was evil. But we don't know for sure if he is or not until this scene.
Yeah.
And in this scene, we just see his son Mark, who just recently got his powers. He goes out to join the superhero team he's been fighting alongside of, which are basically the Teen Titans. And they're up against this alien race who are able to hop between our dimension and theirs. They've lost a few battles, but every time they come back, they're stronger. And in this scene, they're so powerful that the Teen Titans stand no chance.
Hmm.
Um, they're just completely outclassed and outmatched. Even the cyborg stand-in here, he basically is just like, we need to leave and nuke the city because we can't contend with these aliens. It's a full-on invasion. The whole fate of the world is in jeopardy. It all comes down to this fight. And we see them move in, and instantly we just see what it does so well is it shows us the threat, the sense
Hmm.
of urgency, like you were talking about.
Right.
We see how outmatched they are. They don't just tell us. Robot tells us they're outclassed, but then they show us. They show them all being overwhelmed and outmatched and just getting their asses handed to them. And right here, you honestly feel like Mark might die.
Yeah.
It's he's bleeding everywhere. He's just getting savagely beaten. His vision's blurring.
Which is what
And
the
then,
DC was lacking is blood and guts and more
yeah,
realistic tone. And yeah.
and then in comes Omni Man. And he just comes up, takes the guy who was most powerful and throws him aside like he's nothing, sits still, lets them open fire on him, and then just says, my turn.
Hmm.
And this is why showing them being overwhelmed is so important. We needed to see a sense of scale. We needed to know where their powers lie. If that hadn't happened, if they hadn't gotten beaten up, we would have just been like, oh, he's beating up a bunch of weaklings. But no, these aliens, they're not weaklings. They're world conquering threats. You get the sense that they've done this to several other planets. And going back to what we were talking about earlier with not knowing Omni Man's intentions, right here, when he ends up in this other world, he simply says, you don't understand. Earth is not your planet.
Hmm.
And that's when we know. There is no miscommunication. Omni Man is just there because he views the world as his property.
And we also see that he's still like hiding this side of him from his son, from his wife, from everybody. He's still keeping up
Yeah,
the narrative that he is the good guy on planet Earth. And although we just see him completely obliterate like
yeah. And that's
another
what's so
world.
brilliant about it. Like, this reveals his intentions and who he truly is as a character, but it doesn't compromise the mystery. We're still left wondering why, if he's this powerful, why is he putting up a facade? And just look at that brutality and the coldness. He just is ruthlessly ending an entire civilization just because they tried to sell dope on his corner. Like, look at this.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Talk about scale. Just the way he decimates their whole planet.
And then it's like, bye.
Yeah, just bye.
Yeah. It's, I love it, but I hate him. Because the scene does a good job of making you hate him. I don't hate him, but I like it just like like he
Yeah,
took out the Justice League. They just paint him as such a good heel, as such a good villain, and that's what makes the show
yeah.
so good. Um, yeah,
That and the voice acting. J.K. Simmons is a phenomenal character actor, and he just does such a good job of portraying Omni.
if they keep going, like I really haven't read the comics. I don't know how in depth they go with this universe, but I mean, to be honest, I could see this live action iteration of this. I could see this going on. It's a
In
whole other thing. So
in
hopefully they
my
don't ruin it.
perfect
But yeah.
world, in my perfect world, they wouldn't have made this animated series. They would have made like 6 films, like 5 films about the Guardians of the Globe, like one-off standalone films, and then a 6th film of them all coming together, working together, Omni-Man showing up and helping out, but not joining their team. And then after those 6, then they do a story about Invincible and him getting his powers. Because we now know, having seen the show, the reason he was pretending was he was just waiting to see if Mark would get his powers and if there would be another Viltrum.
Mhm.
But imagine if there were 6 films just establishing all these characters, and then the 7th film, Mark gets his powers, and Omni Man just murders all these characters who have their own films, who have been established, who have a fan base, and just yanks the rug right out from under them. And it's just like, oh, you thought this was a DC ripoff? No, 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 no.
Yeah, I don't know if that would have worked. I want to say I would have liked that, but I don't know
Oh, most
how they
people
would.
would hate it, but that's my version of a perfect world where just film studios are just like, let's tell a compelling story. I don't care if anyone likes it or not. We're just gonna tell a crazy story. Like,
Yeah. Well, I am really interested to see what they do with season two. But like the last like 30 seconds of like the final episode, or just like the kind of montage of all of like the side plots and stuff like that that were going on, is so crazy. And so
yeah,
just I really just can't wait. But yeah, it's gonna be good. Invincible is definitely my top five uh, animated TV shows, if not number one, to be honest. Like I think Avatar: The Last Airbender's up there too, but it's kind of between those for me. And the Justice League,
my
like the
only
animated series.
concern, my only concern is that they're never going to top what they did in season 1, because the most compelling part of season 1 to me was just waiting to see what Omni Man was all about. And
Hmm.
he did not disappoint when he finally just has nothing left to hide and is trying to teach Mark that Earthlings are nothing more than pets to him that he can just put down at a moment's notice because 5 years, 100 years, or right now, who cares when they die? They're nothing. And going forward, it's just they're going to be going on adventures, fighting villains, and it's going to be good because all the other episodes that didn't involve Omni Man and that drama were still good. But I don't know. What are the if the whole Viltrum armada shows up, there's nothing that can stop it. So what do they do? Where do they go from here? And maybe they pull it off. Maybe it's better, but I just worry they can't really top that reveal, you know?
Yeah. I think there's going to be some type of kryptonite like substance that comes into play because like you said when there's an entire world of those type of beings there has to be some weakness, there has to be something that's going on there where we can level the playing field. And I wouldn't really have a problem with that. Hopefully it's not something dumb or a blatant ripoff of kryptonite, but something along those lines I feel like is going to come into play in season two. um, or like the Seth Rogen alien with one eye. Maybe they kind of compile a army of the other planets that are kind of the resistance to Viltrumites, and they do some type of planning so they can infiltrate and do something along those lines as well. But yeah, I can't wait. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. And I think they're going to make a season that's just as good, but like you said, not better. I think I have enough faith in them to be able to write a compelling story that's just as good. So, yeah, we'll see. And what's I wanted to also bring up that you weren't a huge fan of their other show that is kind of similar to this with realistic like superheroes, The Boys, just because of the climate that was going on in the real world at the time, and it's a pretty heavy show with material. You just really weren't into it. But would you give it another chance, or do you plan on picking it back up at any point?
I honestly don't plan on going to it because what sets it apart for me is Omni Man is compelling because he's not human. And hearing his worldview, like hearing him talk about his own wife as though she's a pet just because he's this being who's lived for thousands of years. That's what's compelling and interesting to me. Just putting myself into that mind space of, yeah, to us, he is unspeakably evil. But to him, he's just doing a job. It'd be like if you got hired to go train a staff who's been messing up at the theater. And
Mhm.
you just walked in and you had to basically fire a few people and set some examples because they're just messing up. And it's just a job for you. And in 2 weeks, you'll be done, you'll move on. That's kind of what it's like for him. And that's just interesting just to view it from our angle and be like, this is how much you're screwing us up. And you're basically setting us up to be your slaves, will be serving under you. But to him, he's just like, well, of course, look at me. I'm superior and you're a dog. Like, why would a dog go cook breakfast? No, you're a dog. Go sit over there and wait to be fed. And that's what's interesting and compelling. Whereas the boys poses the question, what if normal people had superpowers and the power just corrupted them? And it's to me, that's why it's not compelling. We've already seen the horrors of what men with power do. And I don't need to see a perverted version of my childhood heroes
Uh,
acting like Harvey Weinstein.
I don't think that's really what The Boys is trying to do. I think that the whole point of The Boys is normal people taking down superheroes because they know that they're evil and corrupt. And I don't think any of the superheroes are really human or have blatantly projected that they started off as human and got powers.
Now,
Um,
see, I've only seen half of the first episode, so that was my impression. But I was told that they were given their powers, that they were the subject of experiments. Is that not the case? Have you seen the show?
I've seen more than you have, but the show primarily is non-superhero type people taking them down because they were screwed over in some shape or form from somebody with powers. So I honestly think
Gotcha.
that you should take another look at the show, just because
But you
Homelander
haven't even
also,
finished it.
well, that's because I can see where it's going, and my big issue with it is it implies, again, a lot of the political climate that is going on with today's world. Like you, I really didn't want to go through that because they explore so much of what superheroes would do with social media, what corporations would do if they owned the superheroes. Like literally, one part of that is they have like an Aquaman stand-in or substitute, and he complains that the corporation only sends him on missions that have to do with water, because when the photo op happens, he needs to be the one that's there because water is involved. So
Right.
like there's just so much of that bullshit. I'm just like, I get so much of this in normal shows that that's kind of what turns me
Yeah.
off of this show. Not so much of, the humans kind of getting powers and that's what corrupts them. I don't think that that is as much present as what you're thinking, but there are
Well,
other things that would probably turn you off from the show as well. Just the
yeah,
real
because it
world
wasn't it
nonsense of
wasn't
it.
specifically that. I mean, like I said, I watched half the first episode, and what I saw was the Flash murder someone and then just lie about it and be like, well, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm just serving in the line of duty. And then Aquaman basically being like, I can make you the person you want to be. I can make you a star. You
Hmm.
just got to blow me first. And that's kind of what I was going at. Like,
But that's
it
real
is
world
these
stuff.
people who, yeah. And yeah, I mean, you're not far off. Uh, Honestly, you just got a few details wrong, but basically what you're saying is accurate. I've seen all these horrors in real life. I've seen real men with power doing this stuff, not just in the past, in the present.
Mhm.
It's gonna keep happening. And if someone wants to watch that, more power to them. It's the same reason I don't watch The Handmaid's Tale. I don't need to see these fantastical representations of the horrors of the real world because I get enough of that. Now, if it's in a movie, that's digestible because it's 2.5 hours max.
Right.
But a show that's going to span multiple seasons and hours of content, I I don't need it.
The Walking Dead, the multiple seasons of misery and disappointment and just straight up torture.
What
Yeah.
bothers me about The Walking Dead is just that they never do anything interesting. They never challenge the status quo. I Rick has what 12 mental breakdowns, and an episode after his mental breakdown, he's like, "Oh, I'm fine now. I just had a bad day. I'm good though." I kept watching that show thinking, okay, this is what finally sends him over the edge. Now he's going to be a bad guy. And that never happened.
Yeah.
And they were just too afraid to try anything new or do anything interesting that challenged anything. And I can't believe that the show is still going and that it's gotten two spinoffs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it has a cult following, that's for sure. So I think that's what's kept it going. And I yeah, I feel like that's kind of where Game of Thrones, I didn't watch Game of Thrones, but that's from what I know about the show. I think that's where they succeeded because they were constantly killing people off. They were constantly, just throwing in twists and turns throughout the seasons, which I felt like people really enjoyed. Of course, not with the
And
last
that's why
season.
That's why everyone despised the final season, because it was a show where no one was safe and you were always anxious and worried about every character. And then the last season comes along and it's just, hey, we're going to put this character in a no-win scenario where they're definitely 100% going to die. Oh, so you're killing off this main character? Oh, no, no, no. They got too much plot armor at this point. So they're going to live. But it's a no-win scenario. I'm seeing this scenario. There's no possible way they survive this. Yeah, but they do. Why? Because of plot armor. And it's just, it goes from one of the most interesting, well-made, well-acted shows where no one is safe and they do interesting things to what if we were just like every other show on TV?
That show is going to be a case study for years. Like that
Yes.
show was all anybody talked about for years. You couldn't escape it. When the last season was going on, like I watched the last episode because all of my roommates were in the living room. It was just a big, it was like the fucking Super Bowl. They weren't enjoying the last season, but that final episode, they'll be damned if we're gonna skip it. And it was a big thing and a big deal. And as soon as that episode was over, you could feel the just it dropped. Like you could feel that they weren't even talk we weren't even talking about it 10 minutes afterwards because it was
Yeah.
just that disappointing and that underwhelming. And I felt bad for them because I'm just like, you guys spent years of your life invested in this show, loving this show, just to be this screwed over and this not satisfied. And I'm
And
like,
I
I just feel bad.
I am so lucky because of my outlook regarding TV shows, because I did not watch Game of Thrones at all until they were filming the final season.
Mm,
I binged all of Game of Thrones 2 months before the final season started airing. So I didn't have years of investment like all those other people. I was
right.
told for years that I needed to watch it. You gotta see it, gotta watch it, blah, blah, blah. Like you said, it was unescapable. There was never a social setting that I engaged with where someone didn't bring up Game of Thrones. And when they announced that it was ending, I was like, okay, cool. It's gonna get an ending. I can just watch it all now. So let's check it out. I did the same thing with Breaking Bad. I didn't jump in until season 5 started coming on TV. But yeah, you're right. I feel so bad for the people who supported it from the beginning and made it what it was, because they just had years of investment, whereas I watched it all in the course of 3 months. And when the end hit, I was just like, "Yikes! That is rough." And it, I, I can't think of anything, any scenario ever in history where something was that popular and unescapable. And then, like you said, 10 minutes after the final episode aired, no one wants to talk about it. It disappeared from the cultural zeitgeist. It's just,
Yeah.
it's gone.